When he ignores you, your heart shrinks, your mind is overwhelmed by assumptions, and the silence screams louder than any word. But what if that distance is, in fact, a silent declaration of love? What appears as disinterest might hide a deep psychological battle that he himself does not understand. In this video, we will reveal why a man who loves can paradoxically withdraw and ignore you. We will dive into the unconscious forces that drive him, the feminine projections he carries, and the visceral fear of being consumed by what he most desires. Carl Jung's analytical psychology will be our guide in understanding how love awakens not only light, but also shadow. If you have ever wondered why he stays silent, prepare yourself. The answers lie deeper within him and within you than you imagine. Leave a comment saying, "I deserve a conscious love." Carl Jung's analytical psychology offers us a powerful key to understanding contradictory behaviors, especially in romantic relationships. When a man who loves distances himself or ignores you, it is often not a sign of disinterest but rather an unconscious reaction to internal forces beyond his control. Jung talks about projection, a mechanism by which we project onto another parts of ourselves that we have yet to recognize. When falling in love, a man frequently projects onto the woman his anima, the feminine archetype of his psyche. She becomes, unknowingly, the embodiment of everything he seeks, fears, and desires to integrate. This process can be overwhelming. When confronted with his own shadow, fears, traumas, insecurities, he might retreat. True love activates the individuation journey, which requires facing the unconscious and integrating both the light and the denied aspects of oneself. In this context, ignoring becomes a defense mechanism, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares too much and does not know how to handle the transformation that this love demands from him. Distance often reflects the conflict between the desire for union with the other and the fear of losing one's identity. Instead of interpreting the silence as rejection, it is necessary to see it as a possible sign that the relationship has touched deep layers. The integration of the anima in the man and of the shadow in the woman are crucial steps toward a real, not idealized encounter. If he loves you, yet ignores you, perhaps he is facing the greatest challenge of his psychological journey: to love without losing himself. Love, especially the kind that touches the depths of the soul, is not only an experience of joy and connection, it is also an intense mirror reflecting our hidden parts. Carl Jung warns us that everything that is unconscious in us ends up manifesting in the external world, particularly in our most intimate relationships. When a man truly loves, that feeling can trigger not only his desires and dreams, but also his deepest wounds, traumas, and fears. That is his shadow. According to Jung, the shadow represents everything that has been repressed or denied throughout life. These are impulses, emotions, and aspects of the self that, because they do not fit the ideal self-image, end up being pushed into the unconscious. When this man encounters a woman who awakens real feelings in him, he unconsciously starts to project onto her both his light and his darkness. This is a natural process of the psyche, but one that requires maturity to be understood and integrated. That is why, more often than not, instead of moving closer, he retreats. True love not only invites surrender, but also demands a deep transformation. It is as if his soul knew that to love fully, he would have to confront everything he has been avoiding. The fear of losing himself in the other, of losing control, of giving up the defenses built over a lifetime, becomes stronger than the desire for connection, and so he distances himself. The impulse to ignore, to isolate oneself, or even to act coldly may be an unconscious attempt to preserve the fragmented identity he has built. When love activates the shadow, the man finds himself facing an internal chasm. He must choose between confronting his wounds or clinging to the safety of the known. And since many are not emotionally prepared for that confrontation, they end up choosing to flee. In this context, the silence, the lack of contact, and the apparent indifference are not necessarily reflections of a lack of love. On the contrary, they may indicate that the feeling has awakened something so deep that he still does not know how to cope with it. This movement, although painful for the one on the receiving end, is also a call for each person to look inward and recognize what this bond is mirroring. For the woman who feels ignored, the pain can be devastating, especially if she is also projecting her own idealizations and unresolved needs onto him. However, understanding this process can transform the experience. When she realizes that his withdrawal may be the result of an internal confrontation with his own shadow, she stops personalizing the abandonment and begins to see the psychological dynamics behind his behavior. It is important to remember that true love is a journey of individuation, a process in which both partners are invited to become more authentic versions of themselves. If the bond is deep, it will inevitably awaken childhood wounds, inherited patterns, and the defenses built to survive. And that is necessary because there is no transformation without crisis. So when he ignores you after showing love, he might be internally struggling with the fear of losing himself in you, of dissolving in a surrender that demands more than he can offer at that moment. What he truly fears is not the relationship itself, but what it awakens within him, the need for change, for healing, and for the integration of his own shadow. This is the beauty and the pain of love that touches the soul. It does not come only to unite, but also to reveal, and we are not always ready to see what will be exposed. But by understanding the psychological root of this behavior, you gain power. Not the power to control the other, but the power to choose how you will position yourself in the face of pain, with awareness, compassion, and courage. Carl Jung described the anima as the feminine archetype present in a man's psyche, an inner image that shapes the way he perceives and relates to women. This figure, built from emotional experiences with feminine figures in childhood, especially the mother, represents much more than an idealization. It is the gateway to the wholeness of the masculine psyche. However, when a man is not yet aware of his anima, he projects it onto the women he becomes involved with, creating relationships marked by illusions, expectations, and profound frustrations. When a man loves you and simultaneously withdraws, he is often confronting that projection. You come to represent for him everything mysterious, sensitive, and emotional, everything he was never encouraged to recognize or develop within himself. The woman becomes a mirror of his most fragile and repressed parts. He is attracted and at the same time feels threatened. After all, this contact with his inner feminine can be overwhelming for a masculinized ego that has been taught to value control, reason, and emotional distance as signs of strength. The anima is not merely a romantic or idealized image. It also carries emotional chaos, the desire for fusion, intuition, and sensitivity, forces that, when not understood, generate confusion and fear. Thus, the love he feels for you can be the gateway that activates that forgotten dimension of the psyche, and at the same time the trigger for an internal crisis. When he looks at you, he does not see just you. He sees everything he desires, everything he fears, and everything he never knew how to name. This projection can be enchanting at first. He places you on a pedestal, sees you as unique, perfect, almost magical. But as coexistence reveals your humanity, the projection begins to dissolve, and then disillusionment sets in, not because you have changed, but because you were never, in fact, what he projected onto you. What he loved was an inner image that needed reintegration within him, not something to be sought outside. And when he realizes this, he experiences an emotional collapse. The fantasy shatters, and with it come fear, discomfort, and withdrawal. The wounded masculine is the one who has been disconnected from his sensitivity, who had to swallow his tears, who learned that vulnerability is weakness. By projecting the anima onto a woman, this man approaches the most sacred part of his psyche, but without having the emotional tools to cope with it. It is like opening a door to a universe he has never explored, and that universe screams. He feels small, lost, confused, and so he flees. The pain of his withdrawal is immense for the one on the receiving end, but his pain is also real, only silent, hidden. It is the emptiness of not knowing who he is, of not understanding his feelings, of being unable to maintain a real bond with something that transcends logic. He does love you, but at the same time, he fears you, not for who you are, but for what you represent, a call to transformation. It is important to recognize that this dynamic is not your fault. You did not cause his crisis, but you can choose what to do with this awareness. Instead of trying to rescue him, save him, or convince him to return, perhaps the most powerful act is to allow him the time he needs to face his journey. Meanwhile, you can also reflect on your own projections. What did you expect him to be? What role was he fulfilling in your psyche? Love is not merely an encounter of bodies, it is a mirroring of souls. Understanding the anima and its role in masculine psychology allows us to see withdrawal not as rejection, but as a moment of inner crisis, a call for each person to return to themselves, reintegrate their lost parts, and perhaps one day meet again, not as projected myths but as whole human beings. When a man loves and still ignores you, his actions might seem absurd. Yet under the lens of Jung's analytical psychology, the act of ignoring is not simply neglect or disinterest. It is often a psychic defense against what he still cannot integrate within himself. To understand this behavior, one must look beyond the surface and acknowledge the unconscious mechanisms at work in the male psyche when confronted with the impact of a profound bond. True love is transformative. It disrupts internal structures built over a lifetime, often based on emotional repression, rigid patterns of masculinity, and the fear of surrender and vulnerability. When a man finds himself in a relationship that demands emotional presence, vulnerability, and authenticity, his inner system might react with resistance. Ignoring in this context is not merely fleeing, it is an unconscious attempt to maintain control over an internal reality that is beginning to crumble. Jung shows us that the unconscious is dynamic, and when it is not integrated, it manifests through symptoms, contradictory attitudes, and defensive behaviors. The withdrawal, the silence, the sudden coldness are expressions of this internal conflict. He does not know how to express what he feels because he still hasn't learned to feel fully. For many men, emotional language was silenced early on. So when love knocks at the door, bringing with it the need for genuine connection, he closes himself off. His defense is silence. His strategy is escape. It is common for this type of man to have identified throughout his life with the archetype of the hero, of the rational, of the strong. Showing vulnerability is, for him, a threat to his sense of identity. He fears dissolving in the relationship, fears being invaded by feelings he cannot name, and fears becoming dependent on something he cannot control. And so he ignores you, even while loving you, because true love requires surrender, and that is the opposite of what he was taught to be as a man. This emotional ignorance is also fueled by the shadow, which Jung describes as the hidden side of the personality. Everything that has been rejected, judged, or not accepted by the conscious mind ends up being projected into the unconscious and, in moments of crisis, emerges unexpectedly. The masculine shadow may contain the fear of abandonment, insecurity, repressed anger, neediness, jealousy, fragility, and when true love activates these emotions, he finds himself facing parts of himself he does not recognize. Silence becomes a way to avoid shattering. On the other hand, the act of ignoring can also carry a symbolic meaning. In some archetypal traditions, the hero must go through a desert, an exile, or a period of distancing before he can rediscover himself. In that sense, withdrawal can be an unconscious movement inward, a way to reorganize one's internal world, to understand what is happening, to name what is felt. But when this process remains unconscious, he does not know how to communicate it, and the woman feels only the abandonment. This is where many relationships break down. The woman feels the pain of the silence as a reflection of her own insufficiency, when in reality she is caught up in a process that belongs more to him than to her. By recognizing this, she can break the cycle of pain and reaction. Instead of frantically seeking answers or pleading for attention, she turns inward and reflects on what this behavior is awakening within her. The key here is awareness. Jung said that whatever is not brought into consciousness will manifest in life as fate. If he does not know why he withdraws, why he ignores, why he cannot sustain the love he feels, he will continue to repeat this pattern in all of his relationships. And if the woman also does not understand what this means, she risks hurting herself by trying to fix the other. Ignoring in this context is a cry from the unconscious, a plea for time, space, and silence, so that something internal can reorganize. It is not easy for the one who feels, who waits, who loves. But understanding this behavior as part of a deeper dynamic can transform pain into wisdom. Most importantly, it can allow love, even when not reciprocated in the expected way, to serve as a mirror for the growth of both. Faced with the silence of a man who loves yet withdraws, the woman often finds herself engulfed in an emotional whirlwind: doubt, rejection, insecurity, anger, neediness. However, within this pain lies a hidden invitation, a call to consciousness. Jung stated that every meaningful encounter is, at its core, an opportunity for individuation, the process of becoming who you really are by integrating your internal polarities. And it is precisely at this point that the other's silence can become a gateway to self-knowledge. The awakened woman is not one who does not feel pain, but one who chooses not to lose herself in it. When she understands that his behavior is a reflection of a broader unconscious dynamic, and not an exact measure of her worth, she takes the energy out of the wound and repositions her center of power. She recognizes that true love starts from within, and that the other is merely a mirror, not the source of her completeness. The silence that once was unbearable now becomes an opportunity for inner listening. Instead of asking, "Why is he ignoring me?" the awakened woman asks, "What is this absence trying to show me about myself?" This shift in focus is profound, because rather than seeking emotional validation in the other, she begins to observe her own vulnerabilities, attachment patterns, fantasies of idealized love, and fears of abandonment. And in doing so, she begins the process of healing. This woman does not try to force answers or chase after someone who is distancing himself. She understands that his silence speaks of an internal process that only he can resolve, and she respects that, not as a form of passivity, but as an act of self-love. His withdrawal may, paradoxically, be the necessary space for her to come back to herself, strengthen her identity, and rewrite her emotional stories from a more mature and aware place. The awakened woman also recognizes her own shadow. She realizes that just as he projects his anima onto her, she may have projected onto him the absent father, the idealized savior, or the partner who was supposed to fill her voids. By bringing these images into the light of consciousness, she ceases to be a hostage of unconscious patterns and starts choosing more clearly and freely. She becomes whole, no longer just a half in search of completion. Transforming silence into awareness takes courage. It is easier to blame the other, to label him as cold, immature, or cowardly. It is more difficult to look inward and recognize how much this silence awakens old, still living pains. But it is in this confrontation that the real power of the woman is born. Not a power that dominates, manipulates, or imposes, but a power that embraces, observes, and transforms. The awakened feminine is receptive, yet not passive. It is sensitive, but not so vulnerable that it gets lost. It is deep, yet knows how to protect itself. It knows when to persist and when to let go. It understands that true love is not about clinging, but about liberating. And so even in the face of absence, it does not dissolve, it expands. When the woman enters this state of consciousness, she completely changes the relational dynamic. The man, still trapped in his inner conflicts, senses this shift and often finds himself impacted by it. Not infrequently, this silent yet firm presence awakens in him the desire to look within, to understand what he is losing, to evolve. But that is neither guaranteed, nor should it be her objective. True transformation happens when she stops living in function of his response and begins living according to her own truth. The awakened woman knows she deserves a love that does not silence her or leave her confused. Yet she also understands that the other's maturation process is often slow and that it is not in her hands to accelerate or lead that journey. Her role is to remain true to herself, nurture her soul, grow through her experiences, and wisely choose what deserves her presence. Thus his silence becomes a teacher rather than a punishment, a mirror, not a sentence. And she moves forward, not as one fleeing from pain, but as one who knows that pain is part of the journey, but not its final destination. Love is not merely an encounter, it is a revelation. And when he ignores you, even while loving you, perhaps he is in conflict with parts of himself that he does not even know. His silence speaks of an internal universe in disarray, of unhealed wounds, of a projected anima that confronts him with everything he still has yet to understand about himself. And you, on the other side, carry the pain of feeling invisible, but you also have the chance to transform that pain into awareness. Jung taught us that true union only exists when there is integration. He must find his truth, and you, yours. Love only flourishes when it ceases to be an escape and becomes a presence. And presence begins when you choose to return to yourself. If this content has touched something within you, subscribe to the channel and share this video with anyone who needs to understand these hidden dynamics of love. Leave your comment with the phrase, "I deserve a conscious love," and join a community that seeks relationships that are deeper, more genuine, and transformative. Click on the video that appears on your screen now and continue this journey of self-knowledge with us.